Rupturing the nature of photography and marketing through her collages, Hannah Hawk, now known worldwide as one of the founders of the art movement known as Dadaism, found the aesthetics of modern life and the art it brought as disgusting altogether. Their aesthetic of what they considered to be anti-aesthetic hoped to highlight the tension between militarism and commodity as a set of forces living in tension. Cutting images out with kitchen knives, her collages do little to conceal the manufactured aspects by which these images were created. Breaking and fissuring the rapid flow of information and the tyranny of the visual by which Germans came to live, Hawk made sure to highlight the texture of the paper in her work. Combining the mass amount of images Germans were flooded with, her collages served as an information stream to summarize, through closeness, what so many images could, when placed next to one another, mean for the totality of their production. Hawk, in today's media-filled world, would have a heyday. Setting photographs back into motion like film reels, each clipping is an impressionist stroke of the way Germans had trained to see themselves. Violently cutting out images, each collage is a shock meant to kick you out of the action of having seen so many at once, as the nature of photography and its ability to intensify the relationship to the visual world takes precedence over Picasso's need to dematerialize the way by which to change the relationship between the visual and pictorial world. The space between war, the collapse done between its pictorial relationship on image and the nature of empire, are collapsed in one stroke, as its images are brought together through her work. In a sense, today, we are all a dotted collage of social media posts, as Huck stresses the meaninglessness of all these images, bits and pieces of culture, breaking apart the meaning of commodity. John Hartfield attempted to do the same, seen here as laying the foundation by which war, consumerism, and its spoils come to form and define new men, as sculptures such as this one define a man's body and its destruction through war, through its spoils. Coming together to form direct communicative actions through visual imagery, Hartfield would take stances against Nazism in some of the world's first and most important visual collages, now a mainstay of internet culture, as virtual image collages define not only how we intake news, but the kind of men we believe our public figures to be. Hartfield, seen here, displays the new German woman and her struggle, summarized by bringing the images of the casualties and nature of war together. Depicting a mother with a dead boy soldier in the background, he questions the nobility and courage of military generals by showing, through her children, what is expected of the new German mother. Using shock value, he inhibits the reflective contemplation not allowed by moving images. Rather than a flow of images as seen in a movie, his single shots, such as this one, draw the viewer out of the mass media flow pushed onto the German people. Take, for example, a contemporary reimagining. Stop a TikTok video, turn off the sound, and see just how much visual information we are supposed to consume at once, in one frame, without even contemplating the audio, likes, comments, and rest of it in relation to all the videos seen before. Today, video collage seeks to subsume us into its world, as the fact we are able to access the bombs in Palestine and Ukraine in our own backyards seldom seems to change a thing. Modern factory work required modern techniques. If Hartfield meant to question man's relationship to their mothers and the expectation they would die for them, asking men to fight against war rather than die in it, Hoke questions the identity of the modern German woman. Taking the same mother Hartfield did, she layers her image against a warlike fiery backdrop, pasting over her face the remnants of imperialism. An image of an African mask and a beautiful eye cut out from a fashion ad. Questioning if the German woman could really be reimagined or severed from her origins through this process, this amalgam of information seeks only to pursue the absurdity of modernity through its creation. Hawk continues this in her ethnographic museum series, a living work of images such as the one related here. The German and European woman is satirized through this work, the European so-called other and the distance put between her and the German woman brought to a null as she pastes images of these quote-unquote otherly women over the European nude, industry, and empire, brought together once more. The female body, always the other of man, is in this case negated by bringing the otherness of alien women into man's gaze, as the relationship between both women, their relationship and the sense of power they give the Western man, are laid against a backdrop of violence. Masson, alongside the rest of the surrealists, hoped to achieve some of the same as the Dadaists, highlighting the absurdity of modern imagery through works such as these. Hoping to capture the actual function in visual thought, surrealists such as Masson hoped to remove language from the visual world altogether, highlighting instead the process by which our minds form thought through the visual instead. Bridging the process of thought with the process of sight, Surrealists began to practice visual and pictorial creation as a stream of consciousness, unlike the practice of transmitting the written sign of conventional culture. Foregoing the resolution of an image altogether, they sought to access things not shaped by language for what they considered a truer philosophy of the mind. Altogether, this meant that painting in the beginning of the 20th century begged such a new representation that it was incredible to consider it Western, or having stemmed from Greek or Roman ideals altogether. Luncheons on the grass were replaced by breakfasts seen in modernist living rooms, the women still an other in the world of portraiture. Culminating in strange works such as this one, the nature of commodity and nature are critiqued through such surrealist landscapes and sculptures such as these. Bending the pleasure-pain principles and death drives Freud spoke of, this sculpture, rather than, through its use, allow us to forgo the thought of death and release tension in the process, only draws us closer to it. Gone is the fantasy of the teacup and the women you may drink with it. Instead, the fur draws out the discomfort of having to drink a cup of tea altogether. Commodities at this point fetishize, so we may believe each one is perfectly tailored for ourselves, so we may forget of our innate mortality altogether, were the foundation of modern consumer society. Rather than revel in their creations, Oppenheim questions their legacy as being fetishized consumer objects altogether. Fetishes, in this case of the religious variety, because as Marx described them, we believe them to have value through our religion of consumerism, rather than the human labor and social relations prescribed onto them. Jeff Koons' entire life's work is a direct symptom of this. Creating religious monuments out of the banality of fetishized consumer works, Koons takes the modern consumer fetish and tries as much as possible to drive the death drive out of them into full force as he closes the gap between the psychosexual and material good altogether. Seen here is his series The New, a series of vacuum cleaners and fake advertising projects that seek to glorify his mother and her identity as a fetishized object in American society through consumer goods such as vacuum cleaners, while highlighting the supposed sexual tension Koons finds in these works of art. The vacuum itself is not the fetish alone Koon believes, but rather the culture that made it into a fetish that is worthy of being turned into religious symbols. Slipping back into the world of surrealism once more, Andrew Breton's Slipper Spoon tries to, as the surrealists did, convulse the process by which we see it into a sculpture that highlights the process of visual thought without necessitating the written language necessary to describe it. What the fuck did I write? By which we see into a sculpture that highlights the process? Slipping back into the world of surrealism once more, Andrew Breton's Slipper Spoon tries to, as the surrealists did, convulse the process by which we see into a sculpture, highlighting the process of visual thought without necessitating the written language necessary to describe it. Taking inspiration from the Dadaists as well, the origins of the word Dada can be metaphorized through this slipper spoon. When children begin to speak language, they first scream out da, da, da in the singular, but until they say da-da, that is to say, they add a second da to highlight that the first da had meaning, do adults begin to pay attention to them. Breton, upon seeing a slipper spoon of the same caliber in a market, thought of himself the same thing, only this time in the visual medium. The spoon here can be told and signified as a slipper and spoon at the same time, but only through the inclusion of the boot at the spoon's heel, foregoing language of the written variety for visual language altogether. This unconscious sign, Breton hoped, was interior to all humans, creating a global culture in its own restrained image, through a single sculpture. Halfway across the world, however, Frida Kahlo, alongside her husband and Mexican counterpart, Diego Rivera, would be creating a visual language that, while could be considered Western, was definitely Mexican in nature and origin. Kahlo, having suffered from an intense car crash at a young age, found herself painting visual biographies of herself, depicting her suffering as a woman, not only through the physical restraints put onto her body, but in the societal restraints put onto her as well. Her husband, an avid adulterer, was a constant source of disappointment for Frida, who saw her split Mexican identity completely differently than the way Europeans described or believed of their own. Taking indigenous Mexican and folkloric low art practices as inspiration for a majority of works, Kahlo was renowned worldwide for her self-portraits, portraits that, while directed at men, were never meant to cater to their gazes, nor their fantasies. Seen here is the two Fridas that she saw her husband fighting in between. On the left-hand side is the European Frida, the painter he could show off to his male counterparts at Western art shows. On the right-hand side, connected by a heartstring, is Mexican Frida, seated with her legs open as if to give birth, with her hand covering her pelvis as Olympia's did, this time not in rejection, but in protection of the future of the nation she hides. Summarizing the entirety of the Mexican identity and in a grander scope, all women's identities, in a single image, there is no female other to be seen here. Only the fantasy Diego Rivera has of her on the left-hand side, and her true femininity, not the access to her body, on the right. Pushing further into the 20th century, Andy Warhol would become infamous for his ability to sell art, not necessarily create it, through its latter half. If Duchamp used irony to meet the complacency of ornamentation of the art world, Warhol, the art world's first true gay man in a world full of hedonistic jocks good at painting, threw the bathtub out with the bathwater, as he said, why not just make the consumer good an art piece itself? Questioning if it even mattered that art was a commodity at all, Warhol makes a biography of the freedom of movement through factory life the most American way possible, by speaking of its ability to make a massive American middle class. Putting onto a canvas one of the most notable aspects of a woman's day, buying Campbell chicken and soup for her family and her husband, Warhol does the same to the art market, satirizing and saturating it in the process. To summarize John Waters' statement on Warhol, if you don't like it, then why didn't you find a way to sell it? Cause, today's Warhol counterpart, as easily hated as Warhol was, takes both Morris's propensity for mass production and Warhol's Americana iconography and blends them into sculptures such as these. Blending the low and highbrow of art making. Blending the low and highbrow of art making. Cause focuses his efforts onto highlighting the dread of American society, its death drive and consumer fetishization, into mass-produced toy sculptures that turn him into a millionaire through their purchase. Now idolized in Miami and by rappers, Cause has become the de facto face of Western art, using low art cartoons and public TV show characters to highlight the death drive and capitalist desire in all of us, while at the same time being a direct product of it. This idea of mass production and ornamentation follows us deep into the social media age, where not only are mass media companies showing us how products are made and removing the mythology of them in the process, but they are at the same time creating art through social media algorithms the same way Hannah Hawk did. Collage of images and videos. Internet fashion functions similarly to constructivists. On the one hand, there is the composition of fashion that is made into mythology, akin to an artist studio, and then placed on the body and on Instagram. The person's body can itself be the canvas or religious fetish that gives the apparel its value, but on the other hand, the staging of the image itself can also be what makes it a construction. Despite this, a fashion icon such as Aaliyah Core herself is doing something very similar in her maximal use of household objects and discarded fashion items, as the constructivists and communists did in their construction, albeit adding a blend of Andy Warhol as well. Clothing, once free from the visual medium of Instagram, is then used in its maximal use by adhering to the physical material qualities of the materials, as women write biographies of themselves through said art show in the process. Simultaneously trapped and free, the modern woman is conscious of this choice, but endlessly bound to it, defining and defined by it. What is by now most possibly the most famous painting of the 21st century, Parsing Bill is likely to make no ripples in the puddles of the Western art world, on the account that Jeffrey Epstein, the man who bought this painting and displayed it at his sex trafficking island, was trafficking young female painters through New York City's art world. A modern day Olympia, Clinton taunts any of those entering his island as he wears the dress of the 22-year-old intern he had sex with in the Oval Office, pointing out to any of the island's visitors that eventually the dress of the woman they would abuse would come to be put on and emasculate them. In turn, it means that our original starting point and the source of this whole meth, the oath of the Haredi, is still applicable to this day. Only now it is not the men taking a stand against the whims of women. Rather, it is men like Bill Clinton who, in failing to undertake civic pride, have only become martyrs of their own hypocrisy, having never truly taken the oath as Americans wished of them to begin with. Instead, the majority of the Western identity could be summed up by the relationship between a man such as Kai Cenat, his Chinese friend Ray, and the quote-unquote mutual interests they share in what they consider Black or American culture. In many ways, the entirety of the West is wrapped up in what it thinks of a man like Kai Cenat, and in turn, the West culture has adapted to that definition by supplying Chinese immigrants with the culture they believe Kai Cenat to participate in. In effect, Kai Cenat has been invested with the total identity of the United States, for everything we believe him to be is what we say of ourselves, and what we believe has been imposed onto him. Ready-mades and internet culture have continued into the modern age, not just through memes like troll faces, but through women such as Belle Delphine as well. Catering to the male gaze, she was able to sell her own bathwater as an ironic landside joke to the shit posters of the 2019 internet landscape, in turn becoming a sort of 21st century Duchamp in the process. Assigning cultural value to a good through meme and internet subcultural knowledge, influencers such as Davinci have in many ways come to shape our world the way artists used to before, where once they assigned cultural value, now influencers do. For this reason, I would argue formally there is no truth, only pornography, and that which we lie to ourselves that is not, and label as art, so we may continue to believe to exist as men. So, to plug myself and my own art for a second, here's the cover of my first book, pictured on the left, against the Black Americans posed for Vogue magazine on the right. I spent a long time looking at the cover of my book, questioning just what about it lacked the off putting quality of the images on the right. I realized that, rather than exploiting Malcolm X's image, I had returned him whole, smiling, not as a sex symbol or something meant to threaten a power structure, but return him whole as a symbol of love, rather than one meant to represent a new man. In effect, I am returning Marat whole in this image, not as a painting, but rather as Malcolm X, while Vogue returns Christianity and its restrictions through Coleman Domingo, A$AP Rocky, and Pharrell Williams. Marat's specter still lingers in the West, the foundational violence that produced him hindered by its inability to fulfill his ideals. Pictured on the right is Martin Luther King, drawn by John Wilson in 2002. Rendered whole in a way differently than associated with King, as simply as a kind, benevolent figure, it is Marat's spirit that haunts him, his benevolence here not seen as a picture of love, but as an extension of a promise unfulfilled. It is an autobiography of generations of violence as the one depicted on the cross Jesus died for, the benevolence of embracing violence nonviolently. It is upon these truths that the foundation of Western philosophy has died for, and it is upon this biography of Martin Luther King that it should hope to continue to do so. Thank you.